I'm Schuyler Kropf. I'm the political editor here at the Post and Courier. And with me is Caitlin Byrd, who is our senior political reporter. The week is not over for us. I had a good time following all the races. We finished up on the night of the primary, probably about 1:30 in the morning, and there were still a lot of things going over afterwards. But all the races for us were fun to watch. We watched the governor's race, of course, the two congressional races that matter here on the coast. The first having to do with Nancy Mace, Katie Arrington, and then up the coast with Tom Rice and Russell Fry. So we can ask your questions about that as well. I also want to say that the race is not over here. We still have runoffs going forward for the education secretary race on the Republican and the Democratic side. We also have races going forward for who will be the Democrat pick to take on Tim Scott in November. So those things will be settled 2 weeks from yesterday. Also, so I'm going to turn over to Caitlin. We're talking initially, what kind of work and what do you do? What's the pre-work you do ahead of the primary, of the actual vote?
There is a lot of pre-work that goes into the political coverage that we do here. You know this, but what happens is there are a lot of stories that we write that will actually never see the light of day on election night because we are planning for every possible scenario. I had a story that was ready to go in case Katie Arrington had defeated Nancy Mace. That story will live and die on my computer and y'all will never see the hard work that went into it. We had a story ready in case it went into a runoff. And sometimes, yes, there are political races where we have a strong sense of where things are going to go. But honestly, I think it's more fun, even though it means a hell of a lot more work going into election night. But the great part about, election nights, even though it's anxiety inducing, not only for us and the candidates, is that we do go into each election and each race looking at specific themes that have arisen throughout the entirety of the campaign process. And certainly in the first district race and in the 7th, the influence of President Donald Trump was going to be a huge factor, and we saw a split decision there. But these are two totally different districts, but to the outside eye, folks who are watching South Carolina from afar, or if you're new to South Carolina, or if you've never really spent a lot of time in the 7th or the 1st, you may have been surprised by the outcome. And I will candidly say I was very surprised by the outcome in the 7th. I did not think that it was going to be decided that night. I thought it was going to go to a runoff just given the size of the field. But yeah, to your earlier question, I mean, there's just so much pre-reporting that we do. And a lot of it is stuff that I will hole away things in my notebook as I'm going throughout the entirety of that cycle and just pulling away, oh, this anecdote might be very telling on election night because everything is cumulative. It builds, but you want to make sure that no matter which story that you're writing throughout the entirety of this campaign process, that someone can read it and know exactly what's going on in the race on that particular Tuesday, whether they've been following it for weeks or whether they're just now taking a closer look at it. So there's a lot of legwork, and we have reporters all over the state who are doing this for us on election night, not just here in the Charleston area, but we have people dispatched everywhere.
Yeah, and that's right now where we get the different views. Is we've got bureaus Hilton Head now and Myrtle Beach and Columbia, Rock Hill, all those areas. So Greenville. So we can talk to a lot of different voters, and that's probably the fun thing about it too as well is when we cover events, they're really people going to see the partisans. And if a candidate goes talk, it's because someone wants to go see and support that candidate during the primary season.
And primaries do bring out generally people who are much more politically engaged than your general election voter too.
And we don't really do exit polling. That's more scientific than we do, but we do exit interviews. And after someone has voted already, they their guard is down a little bit, or they're a little bit more proud to talk about who they voted for and why, and that gives us a pretty good of what their points are and what how their vote was swayed and that sort of thing. That's always good to know in putting stories.
Absolutely. And then the other thing too that we do as part of our election night coverage, once we've done a lot of legwork going into the night, is we actually are dispatched throughout the election night party. So we'll actually be stationed with the candidates themselves, getting a sense of what's going on in the room, what the vibe is, which these are anecdotal, but it does give you a sense of where people's spirits are. I know from talking briefly with my colleague Nick Reynolds yesterday when he was up at the Tom Rice election night party, it was a very contrasting party to the tiki bar. I kid you not. He said that Russell Fry was at a tiki bar. So what would end up being kind of Tom Rice's Last Supper I can't take credit for that, but what would end up being Tom Rice's Last Supper would not, would actually turn out to be that way. And it would kind of be foreshadowed at his own election night party that night. So.
And the other thing that we do during the day is we check in at the polling places and talk to the election commission folks, just so we can update on, are there hiccups? Are people angry at the machines? Did they have a right to be something wrong, or was it a precinct moved, or just what the lines are, what the turns out, what are the stay periods? We put a couple stories, updated that 3 or 4 times a day, just so people know. And then, Twitter is a great device too. If you follow our Twitter handles, we can get the information out right away while you're scrolling and see it that way too. So, there's a lot of different steps we can take just, on that day. A lot of prep work goes into it as well. And, I think things ran pretty smoothly. The only hiccup that we saw was there were some issues out of Beaufort County, and they did not get their counts in complete until the next day.
After 5 p.m.
Yeah, so they had an issue with how their maps were drawn and how things were recorded, and that affected some major races. It affected the Nancy Mace Arrington race, because that's a good part of the district as well. So we were waiting for final numbers on that, even though Katie had conceded. One thing that does happen, and this is always interesting, a lot of people don't know about, is after the polls close at 7 o'clock, the local poll managers will run a report and put out what those totals are in that polling places. And a lot of the campaigns will hire people or have staff that go there, and they will write down what the results are.
Because they tape it to the door.
Actually tape it. It's very old school. So
you guys, when I was an intern here, I was a runner for us for a council race. You guys made me run around and phone in numbers.
Yeah. And it's how the campaigns know ahead of everybody else, where they were successful and what happened and that sort of thing too. And a lot of the news services will hire people to do that, especially. But this used to be a very common tactic of the PTAs. They would make their money by sending out their people out to do all these recordings for the campaigns, and it was an easy source of buying whatever a school needs.
That's really cool. And while I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off on election night, you're manning the ship here in the newsroom. Yeah,
I'm kind of, you're a lot like an air traffic controller, because you have different stories coming in at different times. And so you've got to figure out, okay, you read this, have someone read this, what's missing, what it needs, can we wait on this, and that sort of thing too. And I really can't speak to any sort of TV show or any sort of a movie that's really captured what happens accurately in the newsroom on election night. There is a flurry of activity, and we're trying to make deadlines, and if you see that, that's what's happening.
Absolutely. So we went in on Tuesday night, really, like Schuyler said at the top, we're covering a number of races, but some of the big ones of the night, certainly, let's just start at the top of the ticket. The gubernatorial race on the Republican side, Henry McMaster cruised to victory, as we all expected. He did have one challenger, but Trucker Bob did not prevail. He kind of hit the road, so to speak, but that happened. We expected that with that particular race. So the fight was really on the Democratic side of the ticket if you were voting as a Democrat for your party primary on Tuesday. And we had former Charleston Congressman Joe Cunningham on the ballot and State Senator Mia McLeod. Those were really seen as the two frontrunners in the race, but there were more people on the ballot, but it was a head-to-head between the two.
Yeah, we thought Mia would perform much better than she did, but I just don't know how she ran her campaign. There was no TV. She wasn't out and about as much. She did very well in her home area of in the PD where she grew up, but she also did very poorly in her home area of Richland County where she lives now and represents in the state Senate. So there were just a lot of very odd hiccups. But Joe ran a good campaign. He was on TV speaking to the camera.
46 counties more.
Yep. And his issue was abortion in his TV ads, and I'm sure it motivated people.
Yeah, and I was also surprised even though I didn't cover that race directly, because I covered Joe's congressional race, I was especially interested to see whether his message for Democrats was going to translate in a really much more conservative area of the upstate. Even though, conservatives, you typically think that means Republicans, we have conservative Democrats in this state who, for abortion, may actually not have been an issue that they would have wanted their Democrats to be talking about. So, but he did quite well. He did quite well in Greenville County and also up in the Myrtle Beach areas as well.
And there's a lot of things you can talk about it, but he's just starting off his campaign now targeting Governor McMaster, but the numbers will be difficult for a Democrat in the state. We looked at the turnout, and it was, 2-to-1 Republicans' interest in the governor's race versus Democrats. It was about 380,000 to 160,000. So there's a lot of ground to make up going into November.
Did you see a difference this time? I'm embarrassed that I forgot to look it up before we jumped on today, but did you see a difference in early vote totals and whether that had an impact in either of these contests or the gubernatorial?
I don't know what those totals were, but I know that the idea of having 2 weeks of easy early voting, I think it was very well received too. So I think it was quite popular, and we'll see a lot more of that heading into November. Like say for Charleston County, they were able, the law passed so quickly and it could be arranged. They only had one early voting site, but I think the goal is to have at least 7. So they're going to make their 2 weeks earlier ahead of November that much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in the 7th, I will just say the 7th district race, if I had to crown a race the most interesting race of the night, it was definitely the 7th district race. Tom Rice was in the fight for his political life. He's been a congressman up there since that district was created back in what, 2002 or 12?
Yeah, after the
reapportionment. Yeah. So he's been up there for quite some time, and there's no denying that he crossed the line that he could never walk back, which was impeaching former President Donald Trump in the aftermath of the January 6th attacks. And that had been something we were very curious to see as to whether or not Republicans up there were going to forgive their congressman who, by all other measures, has really delivered for his district, addressing things for like issues that farmers were dealing with up there, to flooding, to addressing, some helping people get out of poverty even. I mean, he did a lot for that district, but he will never, ever, when November comes, he will not be on the ballot. And when January comes next year, we largely expect that State Representative Russell Fry, who easily defeated Tom Rice with more than 51% of the vote, is going to swear an oath to the Constitution and be sworn as the next congressman for the 7th.
And you could easily say that it was a test of Donald Trump's strength. That's a huge percentage of what happened. Russell Fry, he was in leadership in the state house. That's so right. It's not like he just came out of nowhere, and he grew up in that area too, and so but I do think you had to point to one issue, was the Trump support up in that district, which is greatly different than what happened down here with Nancy Mace and Katie Arrington. Tell us a little bit about how you covered that and what it was like, and what really surprised you, not about election night, but the way that it played up to that point about which directions the campaigns were going.
Yeah, well, I'll be honest, before about early February of this year, I was kind of surprised by how the race was going, because up until that point, it had been a little bit of a snooze fest. And for me, I've been covering the 1st district since the drama that was 2018, where it was just one thing after the other from start to finish. And in that race, Katie Arrington defeated former Governor Mark Sanford, who never lost an election in his entire life, to her very horrific car accident where we didn't even know if she was going to survive and continue on in that race. And then Democrat Joe Cunningham defeating Katie Arrington and getting this district out of Republican hands for the first time in almost 4 decades. Then in 2020, it was just a battle. From the day after that election in 2018, Republicans were determined to get it back. And so 2020 had more of a national feel to it. There was outside interest. Republicans were coming down to defended territory they never thought they had to. And so with Mace now entering her re-election bid for 2022, we weren't really sure what was going to happen at first, because she did get up to Congress, and within days of starting to represent this district, the attack on January 6th happened. And that's when she went on places like CNN and said she was going to be a new voice for the Republican Party. And I remember distinctly when she was on Fox News and they asked, does Donald Trump have a future in the Republican Party? And she said very plainly, I do not. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is so different, because she worked for him. She was on the payroll for his 2016 presidential campaign. And so this was a diametrically different message that she was delivering now as the Congresswoman after, I still have campaign literature from her race in 20 that has her smiling next to Donald Trump. And so this year was just going to be a huge test. But until Katie Arrington jumped into the race, it looked like it was actually going to be a sleeper. There were a couple of candidates who jumped in. I'm thinking about Ingrid Centuria and Lindsay Piper Loomis, but they were just not really attracting a lot of attention, not a lot of money. They were really struggling to get their name out there, which is really important when you're running for Congress, especially against an incumbent like Nancy Mace, who has such high name ID. and had high name ID before she even ran for Congress, because she ran for Senate before back in 2014 against Lindsey Graham, right? Was it 14? No, 2004. Yeah, so she ran against Lindsey Graham, so she's been a known entity in Republican politics statewide. And then before that, her biggest claim to fame in 1997 was graduating from the Citadel Corps of Cadets, becoming the first woman to ever do so. She wrote a book in the company of men. So there was a lot of name ID power that you had to really be able to overcome if you were going to run against a congresswoman like Nancy Mace. And then in early February, Katie Arrington leaves her job at the Pentagon. And the next day she jumps into the race for Congress. And I thought all hell was about to break loose. And it kind of did. You know, for the next couple of months, it was just breakneck. You know, 24 hours after she launched her campaign, President Donald Trump endorsed her. Days before that, Nikki Haley had endorsed Nancy Mace. So then we had a shadow proxy war happening simultaneous to the actual contest that was going to happen between Nancy and Katie. So there were layers this time. There were a lot of layers going on to this race. And Katie, because of the timing of when she jumped in, it meant she had to just be going 100% velocity the entire time. And that's really, really challenging to do.
Well, I want to talk about that again. Is the endorsement issue can be confusing. Did Nikki Haley really sway people to vote for Nancy over Arrington? And did Donald Trump really sway people to vote for Arrington over Mace? You know, once they say what their position is, everyone absorbs it. Did it really matter, or was there some other, you know, third issue that made people drift towards Mace in the majority this time?
Yeah, I think we can't paint with too broad a brushstroke. You know, it's not just, you know, considering the endorsement. I think that from talking with voters that these endorsements were a factor, or they were a very well-known entity. A lot of people, one of the first things they would tell me if I was asking them about Katie Arrington was they'd ask me, oh, is she the gal that Trump endorsed? Yes. So that had permeated the district. And for some people, that was all the information that they needed to know. But there's a lot of other things going on right now, gas prices especially. That was something that kept coming up, inflation. But when I talked with folks on Sunday, you know, at an event where Nikki Haley was headlining alongside Mace, I actually spoke to a couple of different gentlemen who actually showed up in what I would consider the MAGA gear. They had the red hats, they had the Let's Go Brandon. And I asked them, you know, why are you here today? And they said they really wanted to hear more about the race. And I was like, well, what about Nikki Haley? Is she a factor? And they both kind of shrugged at me. They both sort of shrugged and said, you know, she's nice. I liked her when she was governor, but I just really wanted to know more. So it is a question mark as to what role it played. But for some folks who might like Nikki more than Donald Trump, maybe that's the kind of Republican that they wanted to be behind, whereas others are with Trump through and through. So it's hard to say.
Well, in that vein too, how much did the outside spending play a factor in this as well? Because these outside groups, did you sense any resentment from these outside groups coming in, blocking off the airwaves, or were they informative, or did you think it was there to suppress the turnout? What's the effect of those kind of issues? Because you know they highlighted Mace's support of marijuana and Arrington and her dealings with leaving the Pentagon and what happened there. I mean, or did people just realize that you know when you see a political ad, it's meant to confuse you? Well, I mean, what was the best role that came out of that?
Outside spending, I mean, there's no better way to look at this, I think, than just looking at how the dollars and cents landed. And the majority of the millions of dollars that were spent here were to either support Nancy Mace or oppose Katie Arrington. So even though Nancy in the final days was very much projecting a very strong position, saying she was going to win by double digits, the fact of the matter is that she had a lot of outside help coming in to either try and make that a reality or to fend off this challenge from Katie Arrington. In the end, Nancy didn't get double digits, but she came mighty close. She got about a 9-point win over Katie when she'd been projecting 10 or more. So outside spending, I mean, that is influential to an extent, because even if you want to turn it off, you're going to hear it. It's like background noise. And whether you want to or not, you are going to absorb it a little bit. But I agree with a lot of political operatives who I talk to who are a lot smarter than me, who say, how effective is a mailer? Well, it's how effective is it from the moment you get it out of the mailbox to the trash can? Because that's how long you have to convince someone. And half the time, you know, we've all gotten those mailers, the big bold text, everything's black and white and red. It's all very scary. You don't see a lot of positive ads, especially at the end, but that's intentional because even though a lot of people will tell me they hate negative ads, the truth is negative ads are really effective.
Let me answer a question. We've got this a couple times. This one says passes tens of thousands of Democrats voted in South Carolina in 7. It's always been alleged. Is there any proof to it? No. Tens of thousands. No. It doesn't even come close to doing that. No. I don't know what the point would be to try to sway the election. The 7th is be decided by Republicans, and this one down here, I mean, what you would be alleging was that 10,000 of people would come out and vote for Arrington to maybe make her the more far right candidate against Andy Andrews. I mean,
or lining up against Nancy. I could see it going the other way too, but more likely voting for Katie, thinking that she might be too far right.
Yeah, and then but that would also take you out of circulation. You would be voting in the Democrat governor race. You would be voting in the Democrats pick for Jim Clyburn's race. You would be voting. It's always conspiracy theories are always out there. That there's really been no proof there's ever been a massive cross voting.
Not here. There were similar allegations though that did come out in Georgia, where I'm a little bit more inclined to think there could be some shreds of truth there because of the state of the race there, which was really in the Republican side. And as Schuyler said, in this particular case, I'm going to speak just to Charleston County voters. That means you're losing the opportunity to vote for Joe or Mia in the gubernatorial. You're missing out on the opportunity to vote for which Democrat you want to run against Tim Scott. And down ballot races were a factor this time too, which in Charleston County, one of the most dramatic down ballot races was for Register of Deeds. And Democrats really wanted to vote in that race.
Yeah, and even if you saw some crossover vote, it might be there if you were, just realtors who might be Republicans who wanted to see a change there. That might have happened, but that also goes to the strength of having these open primaries. A lot of times it will be your only pick in a race, but if you're forcing people to register by party, it eliminates a lot of voting in South Carolina, especially when there won't be anything on the ballot to cover you in November. So,
and the other factor I would throw out too is that I don't think there was as much crossover voting too, because there was, at least in the 1st and the 7th, there was an undercurrent that maybe these could go to runoffs. And so if it goes to a runoff, if you voted in the Democrat, then there's a runoff on the Republican side. You can't vote in that Republican runoff. You will not get that opportunity. If you sat the whole thing out, yes, you can vote in the runoff. But sometimes in South Carolina, the fight is going to be in the runoff. So you don't want to throw away that potential second vote opportunity that you have.
And a lot of the numbers too are fairly consistent across the state. People, if they vote in the governor's race, they may not vote in like the Secretary of Agriculture race because no one pays attention to that. So the numbers will obviously be lower, but there's no evidence of a crazy skew of some kind.
So I know that we're coming up. We started a little later, so I guess we can stay on just a few more minutes, and we do appreciate your patience because this is one of a number of events that we actually hold and try to do. Schuyler and I, this is our first Beyond the Headlines. You might be more familiar with us from Pints and Politics, so you could do this while drinking and meet us in person and ask some questions. It's a lot of fun. And we have some really exciting events going on with that soon. But this is something that we do because we want our subscribers to be the most informed readers in South Carolina. And if you're not a subscriber, we want you to know that we're your neighbors. I'm reporting for the people who live down the street from me, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I thought this. If you have any questions or any, you want to clear up any misconceptions about how political newsrooms work, I mean, it's a very simple. You talk to people, you watch results, you follow their positions, and put it all together. So that's what
you're telling them it's not that glamorous.
Yeah.
So it's not.
Yeah.
I was sweating bullets on Tuesday night because we were filing from. It sounds really pretty on the 18th hole of a golf course in Mount Pleasant, but let me tell you, I was sitting next to the New York Times and we were both sweating bullets. It was very hot.
And deadlines rule all, so that was it. So and again, we probably finished up at 1:30 in the morning or so, and you know, we got our first edition out in the paper, and then we stayed and wrote through final for the web. And you know, in a way, the web makes it that much easier. You just get that much more of a story out there than anything that needs updated. We're up again at 6 the next morning and then putting it out that way. And you know, that's what we did following the race for the Democrat for Senate, who was going to who we didn't know until the afternoon again, and who was going to take on Tim Scott in November. And that's going to run.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be really interesting to watch. Not only because it's going to be really interesting because all of the women who are running against Tim Scott are all Black women who actually, if you look at their returns, did really well in their respective parts of the state. It's really interesting. So, you know, where they live, their neighbors voted for them.
And that's another tough race. You know, Tim has, our Senator Scott has some $44 million in his bank, and I think
top fundraising Republican for the U.S. Senate.
Collectively, the three women in the race have less than 200,000. So it's, you know, that's David and Goliath.
Yeah, it is. It is, and it's supposed to be Senator Tim Scott's last election. So we'll see about that because he is raising more money than God right now. So if there are any questions though, now is the time. Otherwise, I've had a lot of fun just being able to talk, and I'm still unpacking the results of Tuesday night's election. Last night was the first night I got a full night's sleep. So
and you know, please stay tuned, sign up for all our newsletters. You know, we thank you all for coming, and you know, do all our newsletters. We'll do Pints and Politics as well too. We've got one coming up Thursday with a couple of top-notch authors, and we're going to advertise that pretty heavily shortly. So just appreciate it all.